Before we get into it, let's start with a question. What if the story we tell about America, about what made this country strong, successful, exceptional, isn't just incomplete, but deliberately misleading? You've heard the tale that this nation was built by lone pioneers, self-reliant men, tough as nails women, that we carved civilization out of a wilderness with nothing but grit, faith, and hard work. No help, no handouts, just bootstraps and bravery. It's a nice story. It's comforting, clean, heroic. But what if that's all it is? A story. What if the real foundation of American success was never rugged individualism, but collective effort? What if everything, from our economy to our rights, from our infrastructure to our culture, was built not by individuals going it alone, but by the people showing up for each other? And what if the myth of the rugged individual isn't just false, but dangerous? Let's pull back the curtain on one of the oldest, most persistent, and most damaging illusions in American life. Let's talk about one of the most enduring myths in American life, the myth of rugged individualism. We've all been raised on it, from school textbooks to blockbuster movies, from campaign speeches to Sunday sermons. It's the idea that America was built by lone pioneers who carved civilization out of wilderness with grit, guts, and more grit. No handouts, no shortcuts, just hard work and personal responsibility. We're told this myth through 1,000 different images. The frontiersman staring down the horizon, the cowboy riding solo into the sunset, the factory owner who started with nothing but a dream, the startup founder who supposedly built their empire in a garage. It's emotionally satisfying, spiritually comforting, and politically powerful. Because it tells us a story about who we are, about what we value, and most importantly, about who deserves what in this country. But here's the truth. It's a lie. A beautifully packaged, carefully marketed, politically useful lie. Because not a single one of us, not you, not me, not the billionaire with the yacht, goes through life alone. We are born into families, into neighborhoods, into infrastructures that someone else built. We go to schools, we drive on roads, we drink clean water. Unless you live in Flint. Sorry, Flint. We live under the protection of police and fire departments. Often flawed, yes, but still public institutions. Our food is currently inspected. Our planes are currently guided. Our lights turn on because generations before us decided we all would be better off if we pooled our resources and built something together. And yet somehow, the same people shouting the loudest about rugged individualism are usually standing on the highest mountain of public investment. They're the ones who inherited land their grandparents got through the Homestead Act, or who benefited from tax breaks, subsidized fuel, publicly funded universities, and patent protections, all while railing against big government. They didn't do it alone. They never did it alone. They just want you to feel bad for needing help. Because the real function of this myth isn't to celebrate independence. It's to shame interdependence. To make people feel weak for needing community, connection, or care. And that shame? It's the first move in a larger game. One where people in power convince the rest of us that public goods are wasteful, that safety nets are handouts, and that empathy is somehow un-American. But deep down, we all know it's not true. America didn't happen because of lone wolves. It happened because of wagon trains, barn raisings, union halls, GI Bills, infrastructure like rural electrification, collective effort. We thrive when we work together. And the myth of rugged individualism? It's just a curtain they pull to hide the truth from view. The irony is hard to miss when you start looking. You've got someone ranting online about government overreach, from a house bought with federally backed mortgages, using electricity from publicly regulated utilities, connected to the internet via fiber optics that wouldn't exist without government-funded research. He's driving a truck on public highways, maintained by tax dollars, to buy groceries delivered through a network of subsidies, freight corridors, and agricultural protections that all trace back to the state. He's watching videos railing against socialism on a smartphone built with technology from NASA, DARPA, and the Defense Department, all while depending on satellites launched by government contracts and monitored by public agencies. This same person might be insured by Medicare or the VA, sending their kids to public schools, benefiting from local police and fire departments, relying on municipal sanitation and water treatment. Maybe he went to college on the GI Bill. Maybe his parents did. Maybe his kid is getting free lunch assistance while he shouts about freeloaders. It's the cognitive dissonance of modern America. The louder someone yells about being independent, the longer the list of publicly funded systems they rely on daily. But it goes deeper, because the myth of rugged individualism doesn't just ignore this interdependence. It actively mocks those who admit they need it. If you say you're struggling, you're told to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you lost your job, it's your fault. If you're disabled or elderly, you're seen as a drain. Unless, of course, you're part of the right demographic or voting bloc, in which case your Social Security check is earned and sacred. But the hypocrisy is plain. Aid for them is called earned benefits. Aid for anyone else? Welfare. This is how the con works. It's not really about independence. It's about who's allowed to ask for help and who's punished for it. So, what are we really talking about when we say rugged individualism? We're not talking about a real economic model or a viable way of living. We're not even talking about personal responsibility, because personal responsibility still exists within a community. What we're talking about is branding, marketing, an ideological head fake. It's a slogan meant to divide working people from one another, to isolate them, to convince them that solidarity is weakness, and to make sure they never ask who's actually profiting from their labor, their taxes, their suffering. Because once people realize that none of us are truly independent, that we all rely on each other and on systems we built together, they might start to ask bigger questions. And that scares the hell out of the people who actually hold power. Because those folks, they rely on you believing this myth far more than they rely on anything else. This myth, this polished fantasy of rugged individualism, didn't just appear out of nowhere. It wasn't some organic cultural evolution. It was crafted, cultivated, repeated, funded, and ultimately weaponized. And none of that was an accident. Because when people start to believe they owe nothing to anyone, that they're the sole author of their success, they also stop seeing the value in anything that looks like collective investment. Public education? They didn't need it, so why fund it? Healthcare? That's for the weak. Public housing, public transit, student loan forgiveness, workers' rights, food assistance? That's all for other people. People who didn't work as hard, didn't try hard enough, didn't make the right choices. And suddenly, the very systems that help millions of people climb the ladder are treated like moral hazards, not lifelines. See how that works? If you can convince someone they did it all by themselves, you can convince them that nobody else deserves help, that their taxes are being stolen, that their neighbor is the problem, not the corporation cutting corners, not the employer suppressing wages, not the billionaire lobbying to gut regulation. It isolates them, atomizes them, turns working class solidarity into a punchline. And once they've been separated, cut off from a sense of mutual responsibility, they're easier to manipulate, easier to divide, easier to turn against one another. And that's the magic trick. You can get people to vote against their own health care, not because they don't want health care, but because they've been trained to think that needing anything is weakness, that asking for help is failure, that solidarity is some kind of moral corruption. And it even gets darker, because once someone believes they've made it all on their own, it's a short leap to believing they're better than those who didn't, more deserving, more righteous, more American. And now you've not just undermined empathy, you've weaponized pride. You've built a caste system on nothing but narrative. You can sell a working class man, struggling to pay his bills, one bad diagnosis away from disaster, a fantasy of superiority, so long as he believes he's different from the people on welfare, or those immigrants, or those cities, or those neighborhoods. That's how you convince the exploited to defend the system that exploits them. How you get the beaten down to police the safety net for holes. How you get a man with no health care to fly a flag that says, "Don't tread on me." This isn't freedom. It's marketing. It's Madison Avenue meets Machiavelli, a narrative carefully engineered to keep the bottom fighting amongst itself while the top consolidates power, quietly, steadily, with both hands. And the real kicker? The ones pushing this myth, the billionaires, the lobbyists, the think tanks and media conglomerates, they know better. They rely on public systems more than anyone. They get the subsidies, the tax breaks, the bailouts, the legal protections, the infrastructure. They just don't want to share it. So they package individualism as a virtue. They dress up selfishness as a liberty. And they hope you never notice the strings. Let's be clear. This myth of rugged individualism, it doesn't apply to everyone equally. It never has. In fact, it's often weaponized selectively, applied like a moral measuring stick to the poor and the struggling, while the wealthy and well-connected, they get a completely different set of rules. The folks at the bottom are told to tough it out, to stop complaining, to get a better job, work harder, learn to code, move to a different state, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They're expected to take personal responsibility for everything, for low wages, for medical bills they can't afford, for rent hikes, for inflation, for student debt, for childhood poverty and generational trauma. But what about the folks at the top? When Wall Street crashes the economy, they get bailed out, no questions asked. When a CEO bankrupts a company, they get a golden parachute. When the stock market wobbles, the Fed steps in to stabilize their assets. When they offload risk on the workers or the public, it's called smart business. Nobody tells them to tighten their belts. Nobody demands they prove they're deserving. Nobody screams about the national debt when a defense contractor wants another billion-dollar check. Instead, the wealthy are treated as too important to fail. Their losses are socialized. Their wins are privatized. And their narratives? Messaged to make them look noble, genius, earned. But let's not pretend. They're not rugged. They're not self-made. They're propped up by subsidies, tax loopholes, lobbyists, deregulation, and inherited advantage. They didn't climb the mountain. They were dropped off at the summit and handed binoculars to watch the rest of us claw our way up. And then, here's the kicker, they have the gall to turn around and sneer at the people below, to lecture the working class about hard work and personal responsibility, to mock the very people whose labor made their wealth possible. That's not individualism. That's aristocracy, dressed up in denim and wrapped in a flag. It's the oldest scam in the book. Demand moral purity from the poor, while the rich run the game without rules. So no, this isn't about freedom. It's about control. It's about a ruling class selling a myth to keep the rest of us ashamed, isolated, and exhausted. They say if you're poor, it's your fault. But if they lose money, it's too big to fail. They say nobody owes you anything, but they'll gut the public sector to protect their dividends. They say work harder, but they've already outsourced your job, automated your industry, and bought the politicians who made it legal. So the next time someone waves that rugged individualism flag, ask who's holding it and who's paying the price. Here's the truth, plain and simple. The strongest, most transformative moments in American history have never come from the lone wolves going it alone. They've come from us, together. The New Deal didn't happen because one man had a good idea. It happened because millions of people were out of work, out of food, and out of patience, and they demanded something better. It happened because the people organized, because unions pushed, because marches swelled up and newspapers shouted and strikes spread. It happened because we, as a society, decided we couldn't just let people starve in the street while a few hoarded all the wealth. The civil rights movement wasn't the story of a single speech or a single man. It was black churches, student groups, working class families, bus boycotts, sit-ins, freedom riders. It was decades of pain and persistence, organizing across towns and states, often under the threat of violence or even death, all in the pursuit of a promise this country still hasn't fully delivered on: liberty and justice for all. The space program? Collective, federal funding, national coordination. Thousands of engineers, scientists, machinists, and mathematicians, including black women like Katherine Johnson, whose names only came to light half a century later. We didn't get to the moon by bootstraps. We got there by building a ladder together. Every major labor victory in this country, the 8-hour workday, the weekend, child labor laws, workplace safety standards, unemployment insurance, came from organized struggle. Not polite suggestions, not market incentives. Struggle. The kind that required people to trust one another, to stand together on picket lines, to risk their jobs and their safety and their freedom, because they knew that divided, they'd fall. And when disaster strikes, hurricanes, wildfires, blackouts, pandemics, we don't fall back on rugged individualism. We turn to each other. We set up shelters, distribute food, donate blood, strap on boots and knock on neighbors' doors. Mutual aid networks pop up faster than federal agencies can respond. That is America at its best. Not a land of loners, but a tapestry of mutual responsibility. Not every man for himself, but we've got your back. And yet, we've been fed this myth, this seductive story that we're each on our own, not because it's true, but because it stops us from seeing the power we have together. Because if we ever stop bickering about who's freeloading, if we ever stop pointing fingers at the poor or the sick or the immigrant or the unemployed, if we looked up just for 1 second and asked, who's rigging this game? We'd realize it's not your neighbor stealing from you. It's not the family on Snap. It's not the cashier with a GoFundMe for her kid's surgery. It's the people at the top who've built entire fortunes on the myth that the rest of us are on our own, and who know full well that if we ever broke that spell, everything would change. So let's call it what it is. Rugged individualism? That's not the soul of America. It's the story they tell us to keep us apart, so they can keep their hands in our pockets and their boots on our necks, and their names off our lips. But when we build together, not apart, we rise. We always have, and we still can. So the next time you hear someone preaching about rugged individualism, whether it's on the campaign trail or cable news, or from the front seat of a lifted truck, ask yourself one simple question. Who benefits from you believing that? Who gets richer when you think you're alone? Who stays in power when you turn your back on your neighbor? Who profits when you blame yourself for problems created by a broken system? Because the truth is, no one is an island. Not now, not ever. That's not weakness. That's reality. We're social creatures, biological collaborators. We build, grow, suffer, thrive together. Community is not failure. Solidarity is not surrender. Asking for help does not make you a burden. It makes you human. And yet, we've been taught to see dependence as shameful, to see interdependence as weakness, to see the collective we as a threat to the almighty me. But that's not by accident. That's by design. Because a person who believes they're alone is easiest to scare, easier to manipulate, easier to blame, easier to sell to. And when enough people believe they're alone, it's not just individuals who suffer. It's democracy that suffers. It's trust that breaks down. It's public investment that dries up. It's neighbors who become strangers, communities that become battlegrounds. And in the vacuum, the one left behind when solidarity dies, the only thing that grows is resentment and fear and grievance. So if you want to do something radical, truly radical, in this fractured world, stand with someone. Stand for someone. Stop believing the lie that you're supposed to carry it all alone. The billionaires and politicians who sell you rugged individualism, they don't live by it. They have lobbyists, tax attorneys, PR teams, hedge funds, generational wealth. They depend on each other every day. But they want you to feel ashamed for needing a bus route, or a paycheck that keeps up with inflation, or clean water, or a doctor. Don't fall for it. Because the biggest threat to their power isn't a lone voice yelling on the internet. It's a movement, a coalition, a community that sees through the myth and chooses each other anyway. In a world trying to convince you to go it alone, the most rebellious, most revolutionary, most radically American thing you can do is to stand together. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice. We can keep clinging to this myth, keep pretending we don't need anyone, keep punishing each other for asking for help, keep mistaking selfishness for strength and branding isolation as freedom. Or we can reject the lie. We can remember that every right we have, every road we drive on, every freedom we enjoy came from someone else fighting beside someone else. We can stop letting shame divide us. Stop letting politicians weaponize our pride. Stop letting billionaires sell us a fantasy while they live off our labor, our taxes, and our silence. Because here's the truth. No one gets through this life alone. And no one should have to. What made this country great was never the myth of the lone wolf. It was the reality of the pack. Solidarity, community, courage, together. That's not weakness. That's the future. So the next time someone tells you to go it alone, tell them you've got something better. Us.